Thanks very much, Peter, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real privilege for us to be here. We felt quite honoured to be invited, so I hope we can sort of repay that expectation. We've been involved in this, Ryan and I, almost from the beginning. So we're well-seasoned volunteers with the Woodland Trust. The way we're going to play this, I've got the easy job. I've got about 10 minutes or so just talking about how we lay the foundations of Heartwood Forest, the transition from farmland to woodland. Brian's got the tough job of talking about the wildlife activities, the wildlife monitoring, again how the wildlife have adapted to and changed with that transition. But neither of us would claim to be experts. Well, we have some expertise, but not as much as some of the folks in the room. So if there are any really tricky questions at the end, fortunately, I think around the room, I've seen a few faces I know that belong to the Heartwood Monitoring Group. It's a group of probably 30 or more people, more than that, who are active in looking at specific aspects of the monitoring. Brian will talk about that a little later. So, as Peter was saying, we'll try and run through quickly, and so we have the questions at the end. A little bit first of all about the Woodland Trust itself. It builds itself to do three things: to create woodland, and that's exactly what's happened at Heartwood Forest, and extending existing woodland. So it's all about the creation side, the protection of existing woodland. That one is very much things like you can think of HS2, and every time I drive out that way and see those, the 200 metres of prime land has just been ploughed up for the trade. You think how much habitat has been lost in that activity. And the other thing is the restoration. So that's bringing back old woodland and recreating some of those wonderful habitats. Brian said this, one thing you can think of this as a CPR of woodland, the create, the protect and the restore. So, going back now to 2008, that was when the Woodland Trust, or a parcel of land, farmland mainly, came up for sale, a large area, 860 acres in fact, rather than 760, but a large amount. Sandridge, you can see the village there, and there's the actual boundary that was for sale is shown there, and there's a road that runs through, quite a busy road in fact, with St Albans down off this side and Wheat Hampstead off that side. This map is a little bit distorted, it's laying back, but what this land featured was some parcels or pockets of truly ancient woodland. So these woods I've marked there, wonderful bluebells, they'll be coming up, well they're already shooting up very, very much at the moment. Other areas, there's no man's land common, which joins it. So from a wildlife perspective, those two are one. You've got the oak, the oak side there, and then the meadow side here. There's another little wood up the top there, and further on, somewhere over there, is Simmonshyde Grapewood. Putting this onto a more traditional map, that's so you can see now the boundary, you can see that main road running up the middle there. Wheat Hampstead to the top, St Albans is off the bottom here. Very much in the middle of, we all know Hertfordshire, a very densely populated county, so this area is within reach of very many people. Again, I'll put the woods on, you can see them there. Stick one there. And the great Simmonshyde wood, I think this is a mix of conifer and deciduous. It's a very, very large wood. This riflebuck wood, a mature wood, we don't know much about it, but it's not part of Heartwood Forest, but it certainly abuts it. And again, from a wildlife point of view, is one and the same. The landscape, very typical of that part of Hertfordshire, it's been rather boringly described as gently undulating with a plateau between two dry valleys. But more particularly, in the top of it, this plateau is clay with flints. It doesn't half get boggy in winter, although it's right at the top. In fact, somewhere at the top there is a spring that comes through in the winter time, fills up a pond, a dog pond we call it, right at the top. The slopes around that, gentle slopes, that's where the soil has got eroded over thousands of years. So you've got more of an exposure of the underlying chalk, and then a lot of the gravel down at the bottom. All told, planting 600,000 trees in gravel, flint and chalk, as you can see, we're actually younger than we look. And so there we are. We started this work. All the volunteers came in. There's me in my youth, standing in a puddle there. And I think one or two of you in the room might recognise yourself there. And we set to. So in 2010, that's when, or 2009, November 2009 was when the planting started. By the March time, 2010, we'd just planted that little bit at the bottom, shown in green, and we gradually stepped through, year on year, planting largely in the strips that's shown. When we got to 2016, a huge amount had been achieved. I've shown on there the various footpaths and bridleways that exist. The yellow bits, those are an area of where we just allowed the land to naturally regenerate. And that was interesting to see what developed. They were very close to an ancient wood here, so a lot of the seeds from particularly the ash trees initially blew onto this area here, and that densely populated with ash trees until dieback virtually finished them all off. This area is something that I know is extremely close to Brian's heart. This is a native tree arboretum with all 60 bar 1 or 2 of the native species in the British Isles are available to see there. The swimming pool is not actually that. That's a community orchard with, well, we planted well over 600 fruit trees, mostly apple and pear, but a lot of the medlars, the peaches, the apricots. Not a particularly good site for an orchard, I might add, but there we are, we did that. But the interesting thing was, taking another aerial shot, in 2016, it didn't look like we'd done very much. You could still see these huge ancient, the ancient woods here, and then these rather pathetic looking areas where we'd done some planting. What had changed by then significantly was a lot of grassland. This is now long, this is clearly a summer photograph. So fairly long grass there, this grass cut much shorter. And that obviously does have an impact on the birds particularly, and the small mammals that would live in there. And Ryan will talk more about that. So by a couple of years later, the planting was finished, so you ended up then with a beautiful mosaic of ancient woodland, untouched as it was, new woodland, hedgerows, grasslands, and flower meadows. A lot of the white areas shown here are wildflower meadows, and they are really coming into their own now. Particularly as the perennials are starting to get fully established. Again, that's something I know Brian's got a lot to say on. Just a couple of contrasting times. 2016, you remember that photo, that aerial shot? That's now looking at it from the ground. A few years later, more or less the same shot, the same angle. You can start to see how certainly the aspens and the birches are really springing up. Some of them 6 metres tall by now. Having done that, a lot of focus is on establishing and creating better habitats. So with planting hedges, laying hedges indeed, trying to do our very best. We were coached by a very expert hedge layer there. So they do them very beautiful. Dead hedging, basically blocking up gaps in old woods to encourage people not to trample through, through some of the undergrowth, but stick to the main paths. Coppicing, we haven't done a lot of that, but it's really hard work for old men. So not too much of that. Let me just end up then with a few facts and figures. It's 860 acres, 600,000 trees, and still counting after there's still a few little tweaks going on. 20 kilometres of footpaths or bridleways. I've mentioned it's owned by the Woodland Trust. It's open all the time. The car park closes, but the place is open all the time. And we get a huge number of people visiting as a result. It is quite a honeypot. We reckon something on the order of 200,000 people visits a year. Many of them the same people, often with their dogs. In fact, increasingly with their dogs. I was talking to a gentleman just outside about the issues that brings. Managing footfall, as you can well imagine, in such a densely populated area, with such an attractive amenity on the doorstep, is a big issue. I will now hand over to Brian, who's got, as I say, the lion's share of talking about these wonderful creatures, the wonderful flowers, and so on, and many more besides. So, over to Brian.
Well, thank you, Tim, and Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. You're all looking rather young, actually. I was hoping that some of you would remember the Peter Sellers sketch of the organ grinder and the monkey. Does that ring a bell?
Hang on a minute, hang on. I'm not sure where this is going.
Well, these are the organ grinders. These are the people who have been trampling well, I wouldn't say trampling, tiptoeing around Heartwood for now 14 years, finding things, identifying things, photographing things, recording them, and generally collecting all that information about the wildlife and how it is changing at Heartwood. Altogether, there are 30 names on this slide, and we thought that having 30 people pop up and say their bit would be a little bit difficult. And so I'm afraid you've got the monkey, and that's me. But the good news is they have supplied me with lots of photographs, a lot of data, and some good stories, and I hope that I'll be able to get across, albeit very quickly, a glimpse of what Heartwood really is. I want to start though just with this, and Tim has already alluded to this. When we started, this was in 2009, the area that was being bought, and this is hectares going this way, hectares, and this is time in years. So at the beginning, about probably 30 to 40 hectares was ancient woodland and hedgerows. And that's pretty well stayed the same. Not entirely, we planted some more hedges, we've laid a few, but that has more or less stayed the same. But about 330 hectares, this is just diagrammatic, it's not accurate, but it's not far wrong, was arable crops, and you saw it in Tim's photograph. And that has disappeared completely over a period of 8 years. So that's a major change that's taken place. And that as that has been happening, so we have been planting trees. And I've shown here, if you like, the growth of the young forest. Now, we started planting trees here in day 0 or day 1, but of course it had no impact at all, again Tim has mentioned this, because it was still mainly grassland. And so in that early year, the site turned from being arable to having an enormous amount of grassland. And that is the picture that I've shown there. So the grassland is increasing dramatically in those first 7 or 8 years, at which point some of the early planted areas begin to cover the ground, and that grassland is no longer accessible for, shall we say, the skylarks and the butterflies, and so the area of grassland now declines. And it will eventually end up at around about 80 hectares of wildflower meadows and grassland. But that's the sort of transition it's going through. And I want you to remember that shape, because you're going to see it again a few times as I go through the various information. So I'm going to start with fungi. There's been annual surveys done by Kerry Robinson and Steve Kelly. Typically they find 60 or 70 species, and overall they don't seem to know exactly, but they say that the total is probably between 200 and 250 species of fungi that they have identified so far. In the new plantations there are fewer, and that's where they're going to focus in years to come. I asked Steve for a few photographs of the fungi, and this is what I got. This is Rumpelstiltskin. I'm sure you all know the story about Rumpelstiltskin. He had got himself into a position where a princess owed him her firstborn child. And she was distraught at this. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, if you can find my name, then I will not take the baby from you. And she searched everywhere, and eventually she found the name, and the story had a happy ending. And I think the significance is that fungi are A, hard to find, because there are many of them underground, and B, they're extremely hard to name. And that's been mentioned before. Nonetheless, we have some with names. This one is the wrinkled peach. It used to be common. It's lovely, isn't it? It's about 5 or 6 centimetres in diameter. It used to be common on elm and dead elm wood, and of course that has largely disappeared now, and so it's become quite a rarity, but it is there still in Heartwood. These are earth stars, and Steve made the point that when you take amateurs to look for fungi, they get really excited when they see these. They're beautiful shapes. And I just wanted to show 2 more pictures. The one at the top there are small fungi growing on the back of a dead bracken leaf. It's the first time they've been recorded in Hertfordshire, and listen to this, they have a diameter of 0.3 millimetres. So if you like things small, this is where you go. I've included the pestering puffball because they are a fungus that is beginning to appear in quite large numbers now in the newly planted areas. And they're quite dramatic, they're quite nice to see. I'm moving on now then to lichens, and a study was done by Andrew Harris in 2012, and is he here tonight? No, unfortunately. But he wrote a report on the lichens, which is an absolute classic of how to write a report when you've done a nature study or survey. If you want to know, do get it. I think it's available on the website, and it's just beautifully written. And the sentence that I really loved was that Heartwood Forest is of interest precisely because its lichens are unremarkable. And what he's saying is that they're the same as all the other hornbeam woods in Hertfordshire and other fences and various areas. And so when we see changes at Heartwood, if they're not reflected in the rest of Hertfordshire, we will know that that's a Heartwood effect. You know, it's something that we have caused. But he said it's only worth doing this about once every 10 years. And I have reminded him that 10 years is now up. I hope he will come back. So a few pictures. So firstly this one, just to illustrate that there are more lichens on some tree species than others, and the ash takes the record for the number of lichen species. And it just illustrates what we're losing as the ash trees die. And although some of those will still be able to grow on other trees, you know, it's a major disruption, if you like, of the woodland as those ash trees go. I asked him which were the lichens he most liked to find. And he said, well, it's not necessarily the rarest, but it's some that I find more interesting than others. And he particularly liked these 2. And I said, so why those 2? He said, well, when I first started recording and taking interest in lichens, I found these 2 in Cornwall and in Pembrokeshire, but none at all in this area, because of the climate, obviously, at that time. And he said, I couldn't believe it. At the turn of the century, they started popping up in Hertfordshire, including Heartwood. And he said it was like old friends coming to visit. But more than that, the top one, which is called the fanfare of trumpets, doesn't like acid substrate. And so as the sulfur dioxide concentration has declined, so they have thrived and become more numerous. Whereas the lower one doesn't seem to have an English name, but in America they call it the hoary rosette lichen. That likes an acid substrate. And so as the twigs and branches are becoming less acid because the sulfur dioxide has gone from the atmosphere, they've moved off the twigs that can still be found on the fences and on the gateposts, which have remained acid. So he said, if you like, you can regard these as the canaries on the cortex, like the canaries in the mines. These are the lichens that can tell you all about the atmospheric conditions and how they're changing. So bryophytes, I have to confess I didn't know what they were, so I'm going to call them mosses and liverworts from now on. But Anita is here, and she will correct anything I say that's wrong, I'm sure. So mosses and liverworts, basically you find them everywhere. Whether you're looking up the twigs, looking at the ground, looking at the fence post, everywhere you look, woodland or dead woodland trees, you will find bryophytes. And so she sent me a selection of photographs. I can't put all of them up, but here are a couple of epiphytes. These you find up in the air. The wood bristle moss and the lateral cryphea. I bet I pronounced that wrongly. Here are some rather nice mosses. These are ones found on dead wood. This one is called the drumstick, or drumsticks, because of these growths. And they have cells at the top that can grow so that the moss is reproducing vegetatively. So that's what those are for. This one is an interesting one because it was first recorded in this country in 1941. And it's an alien, but it spread rapidly over the whole of England, and it's spreading rapidly at Heartwood as well. So some of these aliens can take over almost while you're not looking. They pop up and spread. Then finally, I think these two, that is the one liverwort in the collection of pictures. It's called breecewort, pretty obvious reasons, I think. This one is called extinguisher moss. Now, when I first heard that, I assumed that I didn't know really what to make of it. And then somebody pointed out that if you ever go to a church with candles, when they want to put the candles out, they have a thing called a snuffer. And it looks exactly like these. A stick with a cone on the top, and you hook it over the candle, and it extinguishes it, and you don't get smoke. It puts it out completely. So there is the extinguisher moss. A particularly interesting graph that Anita has produced shows the number of bryophytes that she found in these three different environments. And what's interesting is that there are so many more in the ancient woods than there are in the natural regeneration area or in the newly planted area. We have got a long way to go before those newly planted areas remotely resemble the ancient woods. And in fact, there was a master's thesis written a few years ago, and he looked at the newly planted areas compared with the ancient woods. And the ancient woods, the soil was very much more acid, and because of that there were no earthworms in the soil. That surprised me, but there were no earthworms in the ancient woods. They also had a much higher organic matter, double the organic matter that the new plantations have got. And it's going to take decades, maybe centuries, before these new areas begin to look exactly like the ancient woods that we've got at Heartwood, there from the past. Now come to vascular plants, and Ian Denholm, Alan Mashinova, who's here tonight, Astrid Biddle, Anita Burton and Linda McCardle have all been surveying the vascular plants, and there have been two main areas of activity. The first one is repeat monitoring of vegetation across ecological transects. So looking at a transect through the ancient woods into a newly planted area to see how rapidly the woodland species spread into a newly planted area. Now, I haven't got the results of that. Ian Denholm had said that if he was here, he'd be willing to answer questions, but you know he's got a bad throat and a cold and he couldn't come. So I'll be relying on Alan if you ask any questions, or maybe Anita if you ask questions about that. But the other area was surveying and documenting the flora right across the whole site. And Alan has got a database, or a spreadsheet, and on it there are roughly 42 species of tree and shrub. She clearly hasn't surveyed the arboretum because we've got 60 species there. So I can add a few to this list, Anita. Alan, I'm sorry. Grasses, sedges and ferns about 45, and other flowering plants 220. So there's quite a lot to be going at, if you like. None of these populations, except in the ancient woods, are stable. They're changing still, changing all the time. And there's plenty still to be studying and looking at. What I'm going to do is just flash through some photographs. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a quick show to show you what there is at Heartwood. And the ancient woods I'll show first, these are the bluebells. Very early in the morning, my hand wasn't very steady, but I thought it made quite a nice picture anyway. We've got drifts of wood anemones. We've got carpets of lesser celandine. Incidentally, I don't know whether you knew, but lesser celandine is also known as pilewort. And that's because it was used for curing hemorrhoids. I happen to have the recipe. You grind up the roots, you add a little wine, and then some of your own urine. I'm going to stop at that point. But all of those are wildflowers that come before the leaves of the hornbeam open, and when there's quite a lot of light on the floor of the woods. But there are quite a few that come later and seem able to survive despite the darkness, the lack of sunlight in the woods. So here we have wood speedwell, a very delicate little plant, really, very beautiful. Then we have pignuts, and these appear when the bluebells have died down. These very delicate little umbellifers come through the straw, and they have the flower and the leaves. Apparently, and I haven't tested this, they have a root that is thick and fleshy, and which has a nut-like taste and is edible. And there are theories that when children go gathering nuts in May, it can't be hazelnuts, it can't be May trees because they don't have nuts. Possibly it's pig nuts that they were collecting because they are there to pick in May, that's when they arrive. Enchanter's nightshade. A beautiful thing. I guess it's not quite in focus, but it was dark, believe me. It should really be the Enchantress's nightshade because it is named after Kirke, the Greek goddess. She was the estranged daughter of Helios, the sun god, and she was sent to an island that is spelt A-I-A-I-A. If anyone would like to volunteer how to pronounce that, I'll accept your suggestions. But anyway, she was sent to Ai, where various men approached thinking she would be easy prey, but she had the power of turning men into pigs. So she had a very good defense. In earlier times in this country, though, it was known as a symbol of truth because it is a white flower shining in a dark place. So that is the interpretation. This one is figwort. I was surprised to find it, but perhaps I shouldn't have been. And this one flowers in July to September, when the country really is at its absolute darkest. And it has these extraordinary flowers. And this was also used medicinally. It was used to cure scrofula. You probably know what scrofula is. Scrofula was tuberculosis of the neck. And the name of this plant, I have to look it up, is Scrofularia nodosa. And so when these plants were named, it was named after the medicinal use of the plant. I'm going to move on to the wildflower meadows. Now, they were sown with wildflower mixes, all supposed to be native wildflowers. Some botanists don't like that. They'd rather have left the site to nature to see what happened. But actually, you'd have got a whole load of arable weeds and a lot of grass and couch. Whereas this has bump-started the supply of pollen and nectar and allowed the butterflies and the insects and bumblebees to proliferate rapidly in the early years. So I think it's not been such a bad thing to do. And again, I'm going to run through some of these just to, if you like, whet your appetite. This is what you can see if you visit Heartwood, starting in probably late April, May, running through into July. So this is what we started with. And these are, as you recognise, cornfield annuals. They don't really belong in a forest setting, to be honest. And they know that, and they've pretty well disappeared. Because they're annuals, they get swamped. But early on, they were really quite dramatic. And so our wildflower meadows now look more like this. This one has got oxeye daisies. It's got bird's foot trefoil. Some of these took 3, 4, 5 years to get established and start flowering. So the perennials that were in the mix have gradually come to the fore. Here's another picture of a meadow. This one is, again, it's got the bird's foot trefoil. It's also got, well, other things I probably can't identify, but it's got knapweed as well, particularly loved by some of the butterflies. And if I run through a few through the year, we've got cowslips by the million. Again, they took probably 4 years before they started flowering. You know, they were in the seed mixes, but initially they were very small, and it's only then that the flowers started to come. But cowslip time, visit Heartwood, they're spectacular. These are oxidases, well known. This is red campion, which you also know. Interesting actually, because the first year that was planted, the field was absolutely red with it, or pink probably, but anyway, pink or red. It was spectacular. But 3 or 4 years down the line, there are not so many there. And I think this is a sort of sorting out that the wildflowers are going to do. It would seem that they're not as well adapted to heartwood as some of the other plants that were in the mix. And I think that's it. It's one of the changes that is going to give real interest. This is kidney vetch. I'll come back to this one later. Again, it didn't really get established for probably 4 or 5 years. It's important that it does, as I'll say later. This is ladies' bedstraw. Ladies' bedstraw is called that because when it dries, the straw is very springy, and it was in fact used for stuffing mattresses. And a bonus, apparently, was that it smelled like new mown hay. And in addition to that, it repelled fleas. So if you have got, I had a list somewhere, perhaps I'll have to remember. If you have got scrofula, or hemorrhoids, or suffer from fleas, Heartwood is the place. Never mind the NHS. Come to Heartwood and be cured. This then is knapweed. It's often thought to be common knapweed or black knapweed, but in fact it is a hybrid between at least 2 pure knapweed species. And I want you to notice the base of the flower, which is this very black cone-like texture, which distinguishes it from this one, which is the greater knapweed. And this was in the flower mix. And it produces magnificent plants. They stand about 1.2 meters high. They've got these big heads, and there's the other way you can tell them partly by the colour of the base of the flower, but also by the leaf, which is very highly pinnate. And then really one of my favourites. And interestingly, we have Ken and Linda Smith staying with us at the moment, and she didn't know this, but she's given us a scabious plant to put in our garden, so I'm delighted. Thank you, Linda. And on it is a thick-legged flower beetle. I don't know where it got its name from. Maybe there is. We've also got broomrake. Now, this was not on the list of wildflowers we were expecting, but it probably came in with the wildflower mix. It's common broomrake. It parasitizes clover, of which we have plenty, so I think it's going to continue growing really well into the future. Now, some of the species that we have weren't in the mix as far as we know, but have come through from earlier times when it was still an arable farm. I want to show you just a few of these. This one is musk mallow. For me, that's the prettiest flower in the woods. I think it's just gorgeous, and you will find it at the right time along the boundary of Langley Wood, in the grassy sort of edging to Langley Wood, and there's quite a few of them growing there. Then we have meadow buttercup, 1 metre tall. Again, so much more striking than the other 4 species of buttercup that we have growing at Heartwood. And this one is called rough hawksbeard. And this one grows to 1.8 metres, and it's one that you can really look in the eye. You know, that is eye-level flowers. Again, a very striking species, which Ian Denholm, who's one of the county botanists, was really quite excited by when he found it. He thought it was uncommon in Hertfordshire. Some, of course, arrive as seeds blown in. I want to show just a few. The first one is great mullein, and then we've got 2 orchids that are becoming established. That is the common spotted orchid and pyramidal orchid. The first ones were seen after, I think, about 6 years after we took over the land. That's how long it takes for seeds, tiny seeds blown in, to get established, to grow, and eventually have a bulb big enough that they can produce a flower. We have 2 years, we had a southern marsh orchid as well. It's not been seen since, sadly, and again, it's one that was a bit surprising. But we are optimistic that many other orchid species will eventually come and find heartwood to their liking. That brings us to butterflies. And we have 2 entomologists who've been surveying butterflies. The first one is Andrew Steele, and he has done this transect which he walks every week from the beginning of April until the middle of October. And he's done that since 2010, every year, with no missing. So he's got, and he can identify a butterfly when it flies past at 10 metres up. You know, how do you do it? I really don't know. But occasionally they settle, and he's always right. Then I can tell what they are. The other one is done by Jim Patterson, and he started a new transect in 2015, which is when we started planting this area. So if you like, it's 5 years later, but starting at the same stage of the forest growth. I'm going to focus totally today on Andrew Steele's set, because that is the longer run. And this is a summary of it. I can't spend too long on this slide, but this shows the total number of identified butterflies through the year. So this is his 25 to 30 walks. This is the total number he's seen. And this is from 2010 up to 2022 last year. And I put the different groups, but if you look at the total numbers, it increased rapidly in the first 6 or 7 years, and now it seems to be declining. Now, you can't immediately say what is a weather effect and what is because of the change in habitat. But my guess is, well, perhaps I should say first that the brown area here are the brown butterflies, and all of their caterpillars eat grasses. So I think this shape is a reflection of the amount of grass that's available for those caterpillars over the years as the trees begin to grow and get established. One or two others to mention, perhaps the whites and yellows here. In the first 2 years, half the butterflies he found, pretty nearly, were large white and small white, cabbage whites if you like. And my guess is that they were feeding on the farmer's oilseed rape. And so when that was gone, the population dropped dramatically. And then gradually, 3 or 4 of the white butterflies started to reappear. And one that's particularly encouraging at this area is that the number of brimstone butterflies is now increasing quite rapidly. And I think that's because we're planting Persian buckthorn, and that is the food plant of the brimstone butterfly, or the caterpillar, the larva. So I think that explains why that's increasing again now, and it's mainly brimstones. We've got skippers, very few to start with. Again, they're grass feeding, but the numbers have come up to a much higher level. I want to skip on from that and just show some individual butterflies. And this one is the small blue. There's 2 butterflies that we're particularly proud of and hope we can keep. And one is the small blue. It was only found after about, I think about 2017, the first one was seen, so well into the planting period. But there are only a handful of sites in Hertfordshire where you can see small blue butterflies. And we've had them every year now for the last 5 years. They feed on the flower, or the larva feeds on the flower of the kidney vetch. And with butterfly conservation, we've sown 3 new patches to try and get more kidney vetch established, because we'd love to have one of the major sites for small blues. And it's growing quite well. This is the smallest British butterfly, but we also have the biggest. So here is the purple emperor. Purple emperors need 2 things and like a third. The 2 things they need are tall trees. Well, we've had those for quite a long time. We've got tall ash trees, we've got oak trees, along the edges and in the ancient woods. We've had those. What they also need, though, is sallow or goat willow, which is the food plant of the purple emperor's caterpillars. And we've been planting those at Heartwood. And it took again about 5 or 6 years before the purple emperor realised that we'd set up this perfect haven for them, and we've seen them every year since. And they are magnificent. Now, the third thing that they like is that they like to feed on animal feces. You know, most people think butterflies just drink nectar and pollen. Not a bit of it. These like animal feces. And if you're lucky when you're there is a bridle path goes through the area where these fly. If you're lucky, a horse will come past and oblige. And if you're patient, you may find one of these come down to board. And it's never happened for me actually, but if it does, I'm told they get so besotted with the animal manure that they will allow you to get quite close to take photographs. The meadow brown is the commonest butterfly, and one shouldn't only look at rarities, and often I think what happens to common things is more important. So this is the meadow brown butterfly. I think it's the most numerous butterfly in England as a whole. And this is a graph of how the numbers have changed. Again, I need to explain it. This is the total number that Andrew Steele had seen and identified in all of his walks, his total number. But it's quite a big number actually, 1,800 butterflies is counted. 2010 up to 2022, very few early on, rapid increase in the early years, and guess what? It then seems to have turned down. Again, it may be that there's a weather influence as well, but if we look at what's happened across Hertfordshire and Middlesex as a whole, and Andrew Wood, I think it is, he publishes data on butterfly frequency every year. If you look at his data, then this was what the population, with the purple line, is what the population Meadow Brown had done over the same period. And that hasn't got a dramatic rise and dramatic fall, it is more steady. Some of the detail is the same, so the spike here is very similar to that spike. That probably is a weather effect, but the general shape of it, I think, must be a Heartwood effect. If we look at marbled white, incidentally, I read an article, a rather poetic article actually, that described the marbled white as seeing a full moon through a tracery of bare twigs. And I thought, oh, come on, you've got to be joking. But then I saw this photograph, and I thought, well, maybe you can just about imagine that. There's a full moon shining through a tracery. And again, this is the population. In the early years, there were virtually none. The first 2 years, I think there were none actually at all the first year. Very few. A rapid increase. And it gives an idea of how rapidly butterfly populations can build up when the environment is exactly right for them. Tons of grass, that's what they like. And then, surprise, surprise, it comes down. Maybe that is just the change in the amount of grass that's available and in the right position for them to feed. And if you look at the Hearts and Middlesex, actually, I think, that again is no obvious trend in it, although some of the peaks in the detail is reflected in both. Let's look at the small heath then. In the first 2 years, Andrew saw only one small heath. A few years later, he saw 500. And it just gives you an idea again of how rapidly a butterfly can build up its population if the conditions are just right for it. And guess what? It then declines. During that time, the trend, incidentally, the trend for the Hearts and Middlesex, I've just averaged the data to a mean of 1. I've scaled it to a mean of 1, which is why these numbers are on the side. But again, there's no obvious trend, where there is a bit of a peak there, which perhaps is common to both. And I thought I should do a blue one as well, rather than only looking at the grass feeders. And the common blue, as I'm sure you know, it feeds on bird's foot trefoil, the caterpillar. And it's one of the few butterflies that is almost more beautiful when the wings are closed than when they're open. I mean, this is a gorgeous underwing. I thought it was just to share that. And this is the number that's been seen. And it jumps around all over the place. You know, whereas the grass-feeding one seems to have shown a nice trend, this one is just jumping around. And that jumping around is the same all over Hearts and Middlesex. When I saw these two, I wondered for a moment if I got the data mixed up. I mean, the reflection of one on the other is so precise that it looks almost too good to be true. The only difference is that right at the beginning we had virtually none, because we had none of the food plant, the bird's foot trefoil. That grew again and got established over the first 2, 3, 4 years. So that's why it started low and then came up to a higher value. Right, let's move on to moths. I have to be careful here because we have our moth expert in the audience, Mark Sterling. And he uses light traps and he uses pheromone traps. And again, I asked him if he would illustrate one or two that he is particularly fond of. And the first one he came up with was this, the lunar hornet clearwing. It's a day-flying moth. It was thought to be really quite rare until they discovered a pheromone that would attract it. It was effective in attracting the clearwing. And he said since then, many more have been found. It's perhaps more widespread and a bit more common than had been thought. But it is an amazing mimic. And this is what it is mimicking. There is a hornet. And it not only is the right size, the right shape, the right colour, it also flies with the same flight pattern and it makes the same noise when it's flying. So it is an absolutely stunning mimic. And the only sure way to tell the difference Well, perhaps it's to ask Mark Sterling if he's there. But if not, these are the antennae, and they're the giveaway. And so the clearwing has a moth-like antennae, sort of cone-like structure, whereas the hornet has a segmented antenna. So if you see that, you may know that it's a clearwing. But Mark has said that if he has a clearwing in a jam jar, and he knows it's a clearwing, he still finds it almost impossible to put his hand in the jar. So it looks so much like a hornet, you can't believe it's safe to put your hand in it. So it's an extremely effective method. Another one he liked, was pleased about, was the orange underwing. Rarely has been reported in Hertfordshire. It flies in March, so it's a very early flyer when I think most Lepidopterists are still asleep. And it flies high up in the silver birch trees. However, it has a weakness for urine. So if the horse that was used earlier to attract the emperor happens to go past and urinate, you've got a sporting chance that one of these orange underwings will fly down and sup on that. And then you can get your photograph. He also particularly pleased to have found the privet hawk moth. This is the largest of the resident moths in this country, and it's a very beautiful one. It was the first time he had seen it at Heartwood, although actually we volunteers had seen one a few years earlier. So it's been around a little while. I went on a moth trapping evening with Mark, and during the evening he was using 3 light traps. Several things of note. One was that we were surrounded by a whole haze of moths. It was a wonderful experience. And above that there were bats flitting around. If Mark could, he would have shot them, but he didn't have the appropriate equipment, because of course they eat moths. But also that evening we saw all of these 3 species of hawk moth, which I thought was an amazing thing. The elephant hawk moth, the small elephant hawk moth, and the poplar hawk moth. And you know, it's really quite a wonderful experience. He's doing 2 moth trapping demonstrations this year, so look out for the advertisements and come along. It's a really interesting evening. I perhaps should say it was scheduled to run from 10 until 12, and we didn't realise until we looked at our watches that it was 2 o'clock in the morning. There was so much going on that we couldn't tear ourselves away. Other interesting insects. I like to mention this, but Ian Carl has been our main person to identify them. But this one we found in Langley Wood when we were clearing away some of the brambles to let the bluebells come through. And somebody said, wow, look at that. And as it moved, that violet colour was sort of shimmering in the light. It really was a very beautiful beetle to behold. And somebody who obviously knew their stuff said, oh well, that would be Carabus violaceus, the violet ground beetle. And I was convinced by that until I spoke to Chris Shortall, who is a serious expert, and he said, but there is another beetle that you cannot distinguish from this unless you look at the mouth parts with a microscope. Do you know we failed to do that? And he said that one is called Carabus problematicus. So I'm calling this one, whichever it is, to me it's a problematicus. The next one that Ian Carl, well this is one that Ian Carl sent. He found this at Heartwood. It has only been recorded, yes, I think, no, it's only been reported, let me get my words carefully. It's only been reported in Hertfordshire once before, and that was in 1915. And the report was rejected because it was deemed to be a coastal species and therefore couldn't possibly have been in Hertfordshire. Well, Ian has now found one, and he has no doubt about his identification. I don't know whether they've got rumours of sea level rise or what is happening. Nonetheless, there it is. This then is a leaf beetle. Again, I need to look at my notes. I can't remember now whether it's one that's, let me have a quick look. Yeah, it's just described as local and uncommon, but becoming established in the grasslands at Heartwood. Just 3 more. The tachinid fly, looks like a housefly. It's thought to be rare in Britain, but the range is slowly expanding, and now they can be found at Heartwood. And I think this one is Heartwood. And finally this one, the myriad bug. This doesn't appear until September, which is quite late, apparently, for coleopterists to be out. And this one, I think, is the first time, well, there's been very few records in Hertfordshire, there have been a few others, but not very many. And I must add this one, and this photograph was taken by our bat group, no surprise there when they were out looking for bats and they saw this glowworm. They're lovely, aren't they? Not particularly rare, but really remarkable. And I was surprised to learn, you probably all knew of course, but the larva feeds on slugs and snails. I've been trying to find a source of glowworms to bring into my garden, and apparently there is nobody supplying glowworms in England. So there is a market opportunity, and I volunteer to be your first customer. Reptiles and amphibians, we do have common lizards. David Utting is the expert on common lizards, and the nearest we know of are on Netherlands Land Common, but they must have walked from there. I don't think any of them can fly. So they have appeared in Heartwood, and we can hope they will get more. On the amphibians, I've no pictures, but we do have common frogs, common toads, and the smooth newt. I don't think we have any others, and I don't think any snakes have been seen. But it would be lovely if we did get them at some point. Mammals. Large mammals, it's really the list of suspects that you would expect. The only one that's been seriously surveyed are the badgers by the Hertfordshire Badger Group, and they have reported there are at least 7 active badger sets at Heartwood. And they say they must be the luckiest badgers in Hertfordshire because they've got a perfect environment, nobody's persecuting them, and they can just have a whale of a time. So, a lovely place. The other thing I'd like to say, to show you, is this amazing photograph taken by Andrew Steele. This is really a picture postcard, a picture of a stoat. And it was the first time that we were certain that we had a stoat at Heartwood. Somebody else might contradict me, but that was the first time I had a definite report of a stoat. This now is small mammal surveying, and this is a picture of Pat Carnell. She was at the time, it's in 2012, at the time she was the chairman of the Northumbria Small Mammal Society. She was visiting a relative in St Albans, and she said, do you think they would mind if I came to measure and trap and check what the small mammals are at Heartwood? Well, we bit our hand off. We had nobody else at the time who was doing it, and we said, yes, please come. And what's more, please give us a talk about small mammals the evening before you go and open the traps. So she said, yes, I'll do that. And during the talk, she kept saying, I'd love to see a yellow-necked mouse. So we don't have them in Northumberland, and I've never seen one, but they live more in the south, and they do like ancient woods, so we just might see a yellow-necked mouse. And she said this about 6 times during the evening, and eventually I said, look, Pat, if we get a yellow-necked mouse, I'll buy you a bottle of champagne. And do you know, the second trap we opened, she was thrilled, but I was wishing I'd said Prosecco. The next time she came, I had a bottle of champagne, true to my word, ready to give to her. But before I could even give it to her, her husband, John, jumped out of the car, and he said, as I was coming through Schiphol Airport the other day, I saw a bottle that had your name written on it, and I just had to buy it for you. And there it is. Now, I've been trying to persuade the Woodland Trust to give these as Christmas presents to their top volunteers. And I think our manager's not here tonight, so I think he's still going to fall on deaf ears. Since then, Chantal Helm and Ian Flack have led the charge on finding out about small mammals. And this shows the number that they've caught. They've been putting out 60 traps, 6 rows of 10, every autumn, now since 2010, I think it was, right the way through. And you can see there that over half of them have been wood mice. They've caught and identified 243 wood mice. This is in the main series. There'll be more in side studies they've done as well. The next one is the bank bull. This should be quite a good quiz. What do you think is going to come next, folks? Any guesses? Well done. The field vole is probably underrepresented because, unlike the others, they eat grass, and I'm told they prefer to harvest it themselves rather than have other people's cast-offs. And so they don't come in traps very often, but they are one of the major foods for kestrels and for owls, and so I'm sure we've got a good population of them. Are you going to guess the next one as well? Oh, look at this. Anybody want to come and give this talk? Common shrew. So you know what the next one's going to be? The pygmy shrew. And the next one? Ah, well you should know, because it's the other next mouse. And the next one?
harvest mouse?
It is a harvest mouse.
Wow.
Do you know, we were so surprised to find harvest mice, and Pat and Chantel and Ian, I think, were also surprised. And then one Christmas, it doesn't sound too good, we shouldn't. One Christmas, we had a Christmas party in the pub in Sandridge, and while we were there, a local lady came up to me and said, "Are you part of the Heartwood crowd?" I said, "Yes, guilty." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, 10 years ago, I bought my son a pair of harvest mice for Christmas. And a year later, we had over 100. I had no idea what to do with them, so we went up the main bridle way. That is absolutely true. And I suspect that all our harvest mice are probably descended from that original pair. They're no longer there because the area where they were in the early years is now turning into an oak forest. My guess is, though, that they will have moved somewhere else. There's plenty of places in Heartwood that would be okay for harvest mice. And I can't believe they let a few oak saplings destroy them, so I think they'll still be there somewhere. And do you know what the next one is then? Come on. There's one more to go. No, we haven't got dormice. Yes, you're right, it's a water shrew. There it is. It's the only one that's been found. It was photographed extensively to prove that it really was a water shrew. And we have no idea what it was doing at the edge of Langley Wood. The nearest water of any substance must be, I don't know, 5 miles away? A long way. So obviously they can survive foraging in areas without the water. It's not essential for them the water. Now, have they increased or decreased? That's the question we want to know. How has Heartwood affected it? And I want you to look at the 6 areas where we've been monitoring. The red ones there are in Puddler's Wood. Another set are here on the edge of Langley Wood. And another set are here by a hedgerow that has been established for decades. Maybe 100 years, I don't know. But none of those have really been directly affected by the planting of the saplings at Heartwood or by the distribution of wildflowers. On the other hand, these 3 are in the natural regen zone, which used to be a wheat field. These here and here are also in areas that have been planted. They used to be arable fields, and they are now planted with woodland. So if we look at the results, and I've just averaged those 2 sets, and so the unchanged areas, you can see that, and this is the percentage of traps open overnight. And you can see, counting all mammals, the shrews, the voles, and the wood mice and everything else. And you can see that it jigs up and down a bit from year to year, as you would expect. And there's been a rather strange downturn in last year, but basically it's been pretty steady. Whereas, if you look at the average of the other 3 sets, it's done that. And with a bit of imagination, you would say that this is an upward trend, ending up with pretty nearly the same number of mammals, small mammals, as we've got in the permanent areas. Now, Chantel is always very sceptical of my amateur statistics, and so I consulted the Oracle, which is, of course, Excel, and asked for a trend line, and this is what it produced. So there you are, queuing in. I think the downward trend I wouldn't believe, because that's really been pulled down by this one low value. But I think the increase over time is pretty undisputable. It convinces me anyway. So that's the small mammals. We're now going to look at bats. And I've just got a couple of things to say, or a few things to say about bats. Static bat monitors have been put out regularly over the last few years. And Chantal Helmig and Ian Flack, Margaret Clark have been the 3 who have really been looking at this. And this shows a map of Heartwood, and it shows the number of recordings per night shown as the size of the dot. So the large dots are where there were more than 100 recordings through a night. The small dots, the very small ones, there were only 1 to 10 recordings. And I suppose there's no surprises maybe, but most of the large circles, lots of bat passings, are where you've got large trees, ancient woods, down here by the scout hut and so on. So, as you would expect, there is that association with large trees. Again, the interest is going to be how this changes with time as the smaller plantation grows. At what point does it become equally attractive to the bats? These are the bats that have been recorded, mainly pipistrelles. Common pipistrel the largest. Okay, then what's the 3rd most frequent bat? Pardon? No, it's actually barb still, which is it's a red-listed bat, and it's seen to be rare. I'll come back to the barbastelle in a moment, but I want to quickly show you what all the others have been. And yes, the noctule is there, and there are altogether 9 different species of bat that have been recorded at Heartwood. I'm not sure that they're all resident necessarily, but they have all been recorded by people who know what they're doing. So I think they're true records. But coming back to the barbastelle, it is listed on the red list of a species that is endangered. It breeds in what are called maternity nests, and very few of those have been located in England. Some have, but not very many. And Margaret Clark was very determined to try and find out where the nearest maternity roost might be. And this is the data. Now, cold towels over your shoulders or something to try and understand this. What I'm showing here, it's Margaret's data, but this is time of year, okay? Starting in the spring, going through midsummer, midwinter, and out back into the spring again. This is time of day and night, so 2 p.m, midnight, and then going through the morning, 2, 4, 6, 8 a.m. in the morning. Now, sunset is here, and obviously in the winter the sunset's very early. This is Greenwich Mean Time, by the way, so you won't recognise all the times. Whereas in the summer the sunset's much later, about 9 o'clock GMT. This then is sunrise, and that is sort of mirror image. Sun rising early in midsummer and later in the winter. Now, if you look at this period, which is sort of the autumn going into winter, the barbastelles appear very soon after the sun sets. And her conclusion from that is that there is almost certainly a winter roost somewhere in Heartwood, because they're appearing so soon after the sun's gone down. But if you look in the summer, there's always about an hour before the first barbastelle is recorded. And her conclusion is that there is probably not a maternity roost, a maternal roost in Heartwood. But she's determined to find it, and she's putting different recorders out with synchronized time so that she can track individual bats flying into Heartwood and trying to track back to find where they are. So listen for the next installment. So that's the complete list of mammals, 27 in total. I've often said, if you exclude whales and seals and things like that, we're getting pretty near half the species of mammal on mainland Britain. And it's a fairly impressive total, really. I wouldn't say they're all resident, but they're certainly all of these have passed through and been seen and identified. So it's a place that they like. A few things are missing. For example, we haven't got hedgehogs. There are hedgehogs, I think, in Kimpton and certainly in Wheatonstead, and it would be lovely if they turned up at some point in Heartwood. So we come to bird surveys, and this is the last section. I'm sorry, we are over very good. But breeding bird surveys have been done by Ken and Linda Smith ever since 2009, before the first tree was planted, to 2022. And on their list there are 76 different species. Some would have been birds in passage, so again we can't say that 76 are actually breeding at Heartwood, but many of them will be. There's a monthly bird walk, and they have identified 89 species. Clearly it's going through the winter as well as the summer, and so you'd expect there to be more. The total number of species in official surveys is 97. I was longing to say it was 100.
Okay.
What is it about 100? But in fact it isn't quite that. A challenge for whoever does the next survey. But we've also had, of course, rarities that just appointed occasionally. I saw a kingfisher fly over the Arboretum just earlier last year. I think it was David Utting said he saw cranes fly over. Was that right? Yes, he's nodding. We had great grey strike. We've had hen harriers stay for several days. We've had shorty owl. So, you know, if you add on all these rarities, then the total number of birds seen is well over 100. I'm going to focus on the breeding bird survey, because again we've got the longest record from that. And these are the transects that Ken and Linda walked. A south to north transect, a north to south transect. These are 500 metres apart. I don't know what the total length is, but it takes them 3 hours on 2 mornings in April and then 2 more mornings in May to complete those transects. And I'm going to show you some of the star performers. Normally when I give a talk, I play the sound first and ask you to guess what the bird is. I've got it wrong this time. You all knew it was a skylark anyway. Skylarks are a sort of an iconic species for Heartwood because it was a site known for its abundance of skylarks even before the Woodland Trust bought the site. And so we were very keen to see how they fared under the Woodland Trust management. And these are the observations, the numbers, again this is the numbers of birds, some very high numbers. You know, at peak we had about 160, probably breeding pairs of skylarks at Heartwood. But again there's been that downturn. Remember the shape of the grass curve? Skylarks don't like trees, and so that's what happens. See that again. So this is the records for Hertfordshire from the bird club bird indexes, and so the trend we've seen at Heartwood again is very much a Heartwood effect. Move on to the yellowhammer, a lovely bird to have, or blackbird as well, I think we call it. And so there are quite a lot of these at Heartwood as well. They quite like farmland with hedges, which Heartwood had, and the same happened. The numbers increased in early years and then gone down again. Whereas for Hertfordshire as a whole, the numbers are completely flatlined. We'll move on to the linnet. Linnet population increased rapidly in the early years, and guess what? It's gone down again. In these 2 years, there were linnets everywhere. You're almost tripping over them. There were so many linnets on the site. And in fact, Ken submitted the numbers we had to the, let me get it right, it's the Red List Revival award. And I think became second out of 3,000 sites, wildlife sites, for the highest density of linnets and skylarks. So that was our peak. That really was our peak. But of course, when you get an award, what happens in the next year? You can almost guarantee it. That's the pattern for Hertfordshire as a whole. Then the willow warbler. I don't know why, but the willow warbler has always been one of my real favourite birds. That song is such a sweet sound. It travels so well. You can hear it probably half a mile away almost. And it was not until, I think, 2017, was it, Ken, the first willow warblers, or maybe one before that. And the numbers then built up. And so this shows the increase in willow warbler. Numbers are still relatively small, but there were 14 or 15 calling birds in that year. I think this is the largest density of willow warblers anywhere in Hertfordshire, and it's a bird, I don't think I've heard one for over 20 years. And to come to Heartwood and hear these, I think is a real treat. So come, they arrive, I think April, probably, quite late, but they're singing well through May and June. And finally the reed bunting. I really wasn't expecting reed buntings, but they're fairly strident when you hear them. Again, the numbers have been increasing. Obviously the grasslands, again, they rather like, but they're continuing to rise. Often you see them on the edge of the new plantations. So that's the sort of the niche that they seem to occupy. And then the whitethroat. Whitethroats, Heartwood is whitethroat heaven. There's no doubt about that. I mean, just look how the numbers have increased from 10 the first year, maybe 15 average, right up to 40 or thereabouts, 35 to 40 in recent years. Dramatic increase. They love the scrubby brambles, the blackthorn, and we're increasing that amount of area of scrub. But we haven't got enough. We really need more. And again, if you look at Hertfordshire as a whole, it's been more or less steady during that period. Now what Ken has done is fit a trend line through the whitethroat numbers. And for many of the species, you can fit a straight trend line. And that is what Ken has done with the data. And when you do that, you can estimate, well, it tells you directly, the increase or decrease in population from the beginning to the end of the period. And in the next picture, I think, I'm showing that for all of these species. And so, naught is there. This one's obviously increased. This is the wood pigeon. It's increased by something like 40% over that period. Starlings have gone through the roof. Although interestingly, I don't think they're breeding at Heartwood. I think they're coming to feed and then flying somewhere else for feeding. This one is the whitethroat. I've already shown you. That is off the scale. And so our jackdaw is almost off the scale. Everyone except the chaffinch has increased over the period. And this is what has happened over Hertfordshire as a whole. And so, in every case, Heartwood has done better than the rest of Hertfordshire. I mean, that's a positive. Even for chaffinches, the decline has been slightly less than over the rest of Hertfordshire, but I guess that's not probably significant. But I think that's quite an encouraging result. With some, the robin has shot up, the wren has shot up, jackdaws of course, and so on. These are all the birds where the average count in his breeding bird survey was 5 or more. Below that you can't really get a trend because there's too much noise in the data. But these are the commoner birds. And again, I think what happens to the common birds is just as important as what happens in the rare ones. So these are then the next 10. We have again goldfinches off the top, magpies off the top, Kirsten. Meadow pipit's doing very well, blackcap's doing really well, and chiffchaff's also increasing in numbers. And if you look at Hertfordshire as a whole, the only one with a big increase is the goldfinch, which has been right across Hertfordshire. As I say, in all of the others, Heartwood has performed better than the rest of Hertfordshire. But this is one of the real stars. I am coming now to the climax of this talk. Because I saw this bird when I was out counting people coming in and out early one morning. And it came and settled on a post just about, I don't know, 10 yards away from me. It was a wonderful sight. But this was even better, really, because this was taken, it's a video taken with a mobile phone by Jenny Wilds, one of our volunteers. She was visiting the Arboretum late one afternoon, and can there be any more wonderful sight than a barn owl hunting over grassland? I don't know who was more surprised, actually. I'm also not sure how to stop this video. Let's see if that works. Oh, yes. Colin Shoyer, you probably know, he's a Wheaton resident. He is Mr. Barn Owl for the east of England. He claims to put up 2,500 owl boxes over the years, and they are all being monitored by various people with the young ones ringing. He put, I think it was 6 barn owl boxes at Heartwood back in 2012, and they nested in them, the barn owls nested the first year, and he has ringed, with Peter Wilkinson's help, 65 barn owl chicks in that period. He said when he started taking an interest in barn owls, he reckoned there weren't more than about 10 barn owls in the whole of Hertfordshire. And now we've got this number with commonly 3 breeding pairs at Heartwood. And I think that's a fantastic success story for Heartwood. And Kestrel's not doing badly either. There are Kestrel boxes, and he has ringed 19 Kestrel chicks between 2012 and 22. He has also found a lot of mandarin eggs, but he's not so interested in those. They apparently like the boxes too. So I think that brings me to the end of the story. Oh no, I wanted to come back to this. There's been a lot of excitement in the first 12, 14 years. A lot of changes. Change from arable, change from the trees beginning to be planted, change in the grassland. But what's going to happen beyond is probably even more profound than what has happened up to now. Because as the trees mature and turn from very young plantations into more mature and eventually ancient woodlands, the changes are going to be really, I say profound, maybe not dramatic, because they're going to happen now more slowly. So if you're staying as a volunteer, monitoring wildlife, prepare to be patient and see things as they gradually change. And certainly Ian Denham has often said, apart from the ancient woodlands, the whole of Heartwood is still in a state of flux, and that's worth measuring and following. I think that brings me to my last slide, which is on publications. You may be aware that we've had 3 papers in the journals of the Hertfordshire Naturalist, and we've had 1 report, Ken Smith's report, in the Bird Report 2021, which came out last September. But we also have 3 books that are for sale, and I hope you'll all be looking at these in the entrance hall before you leave. The Arboretum, a guide to the Arboretum with illustration of all the native trees in the UK, in Great Britain. The butterflies, which lists the 30 species with full colour of the butterflies that have been recorded by Andrew Steele and others at Heartwood. And then the wildflower book, and this has illustrations of 160 of the 200 or so wildflowers that you can find there. So I hope you might be tempted to buy these. The money for this all goes to what we call the Heartwood Support Group, and will either be spent at Heartwood or it will be sent to the Woodland Trust. So we've written off the printing costs, and every penny that you give us now goes to one of their charities. Thank you very much.
you, Brian. Thank you, Tim. Really, really fascinating. I am conscious of time, but I equally don't want to curtail questions. What I'm going to suggest, let's try and wrap up for 9:30, which gives us about 10 minutes or so, if that's okay. Any... John.
How will the grasslands be managed?
Where we've got saplings, they're just abandoned. Where we've planted saplings. But where we have wildflower meadows, we have got 3 different regimes. One regime is that they are mown once a year in the autumn and the stuff is carted off. The aim of that is to gradually reduce the nutrient concentration from the farming and get it to a more natural habitat. Some areas are harvested every other year, and that is particularly at the request of the people who are selling barn because they said we need rough, great grass. If you scalp the whole lot, there's nowhere for the mice to hide and the dogs, and there's nowhere for the barn owls to feed. So that's the second one. And the third one is that some of those areas we cultivate on half the area every other year. And so that is giving a chance for some of the seedling bank to regenerate, and it stops getting a complete mat of grasses dominating everything. So those are the 3 regimes.
Thank you. And it's stunned silence.
This one point, 'cause obviously you've created a woodland from arable land, and the grassland, a lot of the grassland species have shown that curve of decline. Is there thought that the trust or organisation could buy extra land, if possible, around Heartwood to try and boost the grassland species that have shown localised decline? Because obviously it's moving towards succession.
Yes.
So is there thought to try and possibly expand the area so you can expand your grassland habitat as the woodland matures?
I don't think we have anybody with woodland trust here.
No, we don't. I think it's safe to say there are no plans to it. There's a very small piece of land that's been gifted to the Woodland Trust that will become part of Heartwood Forest, but it makes us, it's only a relatively small part of the whole, and there are no plans. It's,
I mean, it might be the case that people talk about landscape management, huge landscape management. So it could be that there could be partnerships formed between the Woodland Trust and Hearts and Middlesex or other charitable bodies to try and gain more land, so you can have a more, so you, instead of just being mostly woodland, you have a more varied mosaic type habitat.
Yes.
It might be interesting actually to see a bit, do some analysis of the area around, because I suspect some of the displaced people doing things like skylarks, for example, might have moved into surrounding arable fields, of which there's plenty. So I suspect there's some displacement. Some things have come in and other things have clearly moved out.
Yeah, the only thing about, obviously, when you've got arable commercial, it may not be necessarily wildlife friendly or wildlife environment.
That's true, but clearly if there's a lot of skylarks, I think it depends on how efficient the farmer is, to be honest.
I mean, the other 2 areas that are carefully managed is No Man's Land Common, which does join straight on, and that is very, the grassland there is very carefully managed. And the other one, slightly different, is Heartwood Common, which doesn't quite adjoin, but it's not very far away, also carefully managed, although it does include an extensive golf course and some cricket pitches. But nevertheless, I know Brian, as a keen golfer, would say these places are...
So the best areas of nature on golf courses, if they're managed properly, your golf course can be very good for them.
What I would say is the Woodland Trust is strongly committed to planting trees. I was pleasantly surprised that they were setting between 20 and 25% of this area down to wildflower meadows. Actually, I wish it was 50%. That's my own preference. Obviously, different yours. But if you want that, maybe you've got to support the Wildlife Trust as well as the Woodland Trust.
It's an improvement on what was there before, I think. Sorry.
Do you have a problem with ragwort or too many people walking about?
Ragwort, the horse riders have a problem with ragwort. I don't think we do. It's a native plant. Horses don't eat it, and it's only a problem if it is cut and included in hay when dried, when horses can't detect it.
So do you have it in whole?
There is, yes, there is some. Once or twice it has been topped at the request of horse riders, although as I say, I don't think there's any evidence that a horse will eat live flowering ragwort. It will tend to die out. It's an annual or biennial maybe, it's not an organ perennial. And so it will tend to die out as other species get stronger, and it certainly doesn't live in woodland. So you know, I think it's a transient problem.
And too many feet walking about?
Yes.
There's a lot of feet. There's a lot of feet, and yeah, the concentration is near the car park. You know, a lot of people don't go all that far from the car park. We've had to take measures, particularly in the nearest bluebell wood, Langley wood, quite a large wood, to stop. We put in fact a hard surface through there with a rope barrier to encourage people to stick to the paths, and that's worked. Prior to that, we were finding the paths were getting wider. Dogs, or walkers with dogs, that's a big issue for us, and there's no simple answer to that, but an ongoing sort of education, signing and so forth, social media. Yeah, people, on the whole, because of the way the trees were planted, every tree was planted by a volunteer of some sort. Some were press gang volunteers, but nevertheless we call them volunteers. There's and a lot of school children as well, primary school children mainly. There's been a lot of buy-in, and so a lot of visitors will have been involved in that planting and will be protective of it as a result, and that's fantastic.
Okay, probably time for one last question. At the back there.
It's great that you've got so much data on your wildlife changes throughout the 40 years, but I was wondering if you've also looked at the volunteer base throughout the 14 years to see if maybe you've encouraged, say, it's greater diversity of local volunteers and some of those that may not have been so, you know, academic in their pursuit of wildlife before Heartwood and after Heartwood, after planting some trees?
I think you make a really good point there, because the answer is we should do more to get a greater. We've been challenged on this in the past, that a lot of our working groups, for example, they're held, we had one today. Well, a lot of people at work, and therefore it tends to mean we're getting retired people. So the demographics not good, the ethnic mix is also not good, and we do need to do more to get a better balance, to get a greater involvement. And I don't know what the answer is. We've tried a few things, but none have been really that successful. And if you have some suggestions, we would welcome them. It has been a criticism that's been levelled on us.
We all need to get more young people.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, well, by my reckoning, it's 1:30, and I'm conscious people have to get home, so I'm going to wrap this up there if I may. But Brian, thank you. Hugely interesting. Some amazing facts and figures, some wonderful photographs as well. But it really is encouraging to see when you sort of take the time, free up a bit of space, put a lot of effort in, actually the reward comes through and really, really good. So thank you for the time.
And thank you all for listening.